Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Can you hear me? How's everyone's Global Hack Weeks going so far? Awesome. It looks like we have a good amount of people on the chat and y'all can hear me. That's great to hear. I'm super excited for today. We're going to be talking about open source web development. Super excited to kind of combine a little bit more about open source, like the concepts of open source with web development. And then at the end, we'll be doing a little bit of a coding demo as well. Awesome. Love to see so many familiar faces in the chat too. Awesome. So let's get started. A little bit of an overview of what we'll be doing today. First off, we'll have a little bit of an introduction, both to web development and kind of like open source as a whole. Then I'm going to specifically dive into kind of how open source is relevant to web development. We'll talk a little bit more about that and kind of like how it's been used in the past, like current trends in open source web development. And then after that, I'll give a little bit of an overview on Bootstrap, kind of the history of it, how it's currently being used, and kind of the benefits of Bootstrap in web development. And then finally, I'll have a little bit of a live coding walkthrough where I will build a simple little web page using Bootstrap. And then finally, we'll have some time for questions. If you have any questions about open source web development in general, or like our coding project. And also, if you're curious to look back at these slides a little bit later, you can go to the bit.ly link on this slide. And if you haven't already, make sure you check into this stream at the events.mlh link. Awesome. So my name is Gabriella. I'm a coach here at Major League Hacking, and I've been designing websites in some capacity for the past 9-ish years, and that's if you count editing CSS on WordPress and similar websites. Kind of how I first got interested in web development was because I wanted to change like the design of my blog. But so, like since then, I've gotten a lot more knowledge about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, as well as more advanced like web frameworks like React, Angular, Bootstrap, and a little bit in Django as well. Awesome. So kind of diving into an introduction to open source and kind of like what open source is as a whole. I don't know how many of y'all have like how much you've learned about open source so far, how many people have like gone to other streams so far. So we're kind of just going to talk a little bit about open source, I think as a whole. So if you did not know, open source can be software, hardware, or any content that's released with a license that allows anyone essentially to view, use, modify, and distribute that material freely. We'll get into a little bit later about the specific licensing of open source technologies and kind of how that's relevant to different aspects of open source web development. But now a little bit about different types of open source technology. Some examples of open source software would be things like Django, Angular, Mozilla Firefox. Open source hardware would be things like the Open Compute Project, Arduino, Raspberry Pi. You might have worked with those at MLH events in our hardware lab. They're always super fun, and I love to see those hacks. And then also, some open source content you might be familiar with is Wikipedia. I feel like everyone uses Wikipedia to look something up at some point, or even just to like make a few edits. And then also open educational resources, which is a really cool place for teachers to gain access to some open curriculum to kind of complement and embellish different aspects of their lesson plans. A little bit about the principles of open source. These are kind of the 3 tenets that are the most important to open source and kind of the overall idea and foundation of it. So transparency is a big part of open source. The source code needs to be open and accessible to anyone for something to be open source, because that way you're able to see like kind of the nuts and bolts behind something and see how it works, and people are able to make contributions and kind of form more of a community because of that transparency. That's one of the main differences between open source software or open source technology and kind of proprietary technology. The second tenet or principle of open source development is collaboration. The community aspect of web development, and specifically open source web development, is huge. There's a large community of developers, and we're all kind of like working together to make sure the software, or more broadly, the technology in general, um, is working, it's updated, it's maintained. People are able to learn how to use it as well. People who are contributing to open source technology are very often very open to helping you out, answering your questions, and kind of getting you started on the process about learning about the technology as a whole before encouraging you to make contributions to that open source project. And then finally, licensing is a big part of open source technology. Open source projects have licenses that determine how that specific technology can be used and shared. It varies drastically by the person who created the open source technology originally, or the group of people who created it. And there's kind of like a whole gamut of like how things can be licensed. There's like ones that are very kind of carte blanche with like what you want to do with that technology, and ones that are a little bit more restrictive, but never as restrictive as like proprietary technology, of course. And then kind of some of the benefits of using open source technology, and this is why open source web development is so popular, is because uh, open source web development is very cost effective. There's no licensing fees. There are like costs, like open source isn't just like free in general to like implement, just because you have different implementation fees, such as other like third party softwares you kind of like need to integrate with an open source project, paying developers to integrate it in your specific case, as well as kind of like the labor that goes into people like building and updating the open source project. But it's definitely a lot more affordable than proprietary technology. And also, there's a just like a large piece of open source web development where you're really able to heavily customize things, and really tailor that technology to, sorry, your specific needs and anything you personally or your organization, your group, it like really needs, which I think is cool. And additionally, one of the like really cool things about open source technology is that you're able to make contributions and add features where you like think that something's inefficient, or you think of something that would be cool to add to this. You're able to brainstorm of that, kind of like think that through, build it out, maybe with the help of other people in the community, and then like make that contribution to the technology. Another big thing with open source development, one of the big benefits is the community support. A lot of times when you're working on technology that isn't open source and isn't really driven by that community, it can be sometimes difficult and a little isolating when you're trying to debug, trying to fix your problems. But if you have that like sense of community of people who have built out the software, the hardware, like whatever technology you're working with, um, and are really passionate about it, they're more apt to help you and really receptive when you're reaching out, like asking for assistance, or you just kind of need someone to like explain what's going on. Um, I think that's really cool too, because it makes the whole process, I think, more fun if you have just like a community like behind you while you're working on something. And additionally, kind of the last benefit I'm going to touch on with open source is kind of how like secure it can be compared to more proprietary or like less transparent technology. The transparency really adds to additional security and kind of making these applications better for the community as a whole, because of the need for the source code to be open and accessible to everyone. It makes the data security, the data privacy, like more present. You're able to see exactly like what's happening. And also, if you see something that might be a vulnerability, some people like find it very interesting to kind of go through and like search for vulnerabilities in these applications. They're able to spot them, find a solution, build it out, and then make that contribution to improve this open source technology, which is another reason why making sure that you keep your open source technology updated and you're using the most recent version is so important, because of these security vulnerabilities are constantly kind of being updated and fixed, like during contributions that kind of continually happen as they're spotted and different vulnerabilities are found. All right. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about different copyright, or not copyright, copyleft. I'll get into this a little bit more. different, essentially open source licenses. So if you can see in the top right corner, there's the definition of copyleft, which is kind of the open source version of copyright because it's more open, it's not super restrictive like a copyright is. So essentially what a copyleft is, it is essentially a license that ensures that derivative works or any modifications of like a given technology that's open source, it needs to be distributed under the same conditions or very similar of the original work. So for example, if you take a Bootstrap, like Bootstrap components and you make variations for like your style interest, or you make very slight modifications to the website, you're able to publish that as well and have it be open source, but it needs to be similar to the original copy, the original license that was on the technology. And as you can see here, I have kind of like 3 columns on displayed on screen. These are like generally the 3 categories that licensing in open source falls into. That is permissive, weakly protective, and then strongly/network protective. As you can see down here, the different types of licensing within open source are all kind of like listed, and they kind of like some of them are like within a few different types of like sections, and some are a little bit connected due to like I guess the verbiage. If you're curious about like learning more about this, I'll send a link about like with an article about each specific license, but kind of a little bit of an overview. The first column on the left is permissive. This is the one that is like pretty much the most free license within open source. You're able to do almost unlimited modification. You're almost to do like this is essentially the carte blanche license of open source. Typically the only thing that they require is that you have a copy of like this specific license. So if it's public domain, MIT, Apache, like these different languages or these different licenses, sorry. You just need to include that in your modifications. And then you need to like attribute the original open source software or technology in your modifications or distribution of this kind of like new version of the open source technology. And then in the middle, we have weakly protective, and what falls under that are two different categories. These are both file-based and library-based. So file-based, weakly protective is like kind of a middle ground in between the very strongly protective and the more permissive licensing. So it still allows for a pretty reasonable amount of freedom. You're able to do a good amount of modifications to like the software, this hardware, but it does protect individual components or files within the software. If it's within the hardware, it might protect like very specific parts, and it might require that specific modified files or like parts of the application to remain like as is, and kind of have those files remain open source as well. So it's like a little bit more specific in how it like applies to licensing, if that makes sense. And then for library based, it's similar to file based, but a little bit more restrictive because it applies to an entire library, an entire component, or an entire API within that specific software. The library-based weakly protective licensing is often used in projects where the core library, the core framework needs to remain open source, but the entire application using it can be proprietary. So essentially what that means is if you build like a web app using React, the components themselves remain open source, but your website can be proprietary and you can use that for business purposes and profit like as you wish. And then to the right, we have our last and most restrictive type of licensing. This consists of 2 different types of protective licenses, both strongly protective as well as network protective. And the strongly protective licenses are very strict. They require all derivative works to be open source. So essentially everything that like any like additional application or modification you make with this original work needs to remain open source under the same licensing, and it limits the ability to combine like the open source code you found on this repository, this website, with proprietary code you might have from your company or like another institution. And then a little bit about network protective licensing. These are designed to kind of address like a loophole in like open source licensing where software can be used over like a specific network without distributing the source code. So this is just essentially cracking down on using open source technology but not having that transparency aspect. So the specific requirement of this network protective license is that all software used over a specific network has to have any modifications in the original code made publicly like accessible. So you're able to see like the open source code or any open source modifications that were made. Are there any questions on that? I know there's like a lot. That was a lot of stuff about licensing. Um, all right. Someone asked, is this only about Bootstrap? This is not only about Bootstrap. I'm talking a little bit more broadly about open source web development as a whole. And these types of licenses can apply to um, a lot of different like softwares, hardwares, as well as like open source curriculum I talked about earlier this week, and like general resources. Can I send the link for licensing? I will send that after the presentation. I have it linked in my uh, like speaker notes that I'll be able to access later. So a little bit more about open source within web development specifically. Open source has a ton, like a lot of open source software. I feel like most of the web development I've learned how to use personally is open source. How I started learning how to code and like about web development was all open source. If you joined in later, I like originally learned how to a little bit about HTML and CSS just by like editing the styling on like a WordPress blog because I thought it was interesting and kind of learned vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from there. But there are like those content management systems that are completely open source. Like in addition to, I guess like the proprietary aspects that are like intermingled with that, if that makes sense. But open source is pretty widely used in web dev, both at industry, like at like large companies that you've heard of, like at Fortune 500 companies. Individual developers use open source in web development all the time. Individual web developers are often the people who are contributing to open source web dev, and small organizations pretty much always use open source web dev or are altering open source web dev in some way to meet their needs. And web dev is also pretty unique in the open source arena in that it has a very like wide range of options. So you have everything from no to low code options with things like WordPress and other kind of like content management systems to something like a Django, React, like where you're able to fully customize and code your website fully, like where you have like those components, but can like very deeply edit like the stylistic components of them and like how it functions. Most open source web development is based on JavaScript or TypeScript, but there are a few that are based within Python, like Django. Plowly is one that comes to mind as well, although I'm not sure if that's fully open source. Okay, it looks like someone shared a link for licensing. I love to see when you'll answer each other's questions in the chat. So now I'm going to dive a little bit more into the different types of open source technologies in web development. So as you can see here, the first one we're going to talk about is content management systems. This is things like WordPress, Drupal, Joomla. I've only ever personally used Drupal and WordPress. But I think that this is pretty cool, like specific to web development, because it allows for like a more accessible, like pretty expansive, like feature rich area for people who aren't technical to kind of dip their toes into web development, build a website for whatever they need. And it doesn't have the same control that's typical to most open source, but it still allows a little bit of editing to the stylistic components. Like the content editing is you're able to completely change that, customize the templates a little bit. And they do have the templates too, which I think are great, because it allows kind of that like very user friendly entrance into web development and makes it a little bit less intimidating to get involved with open source web dev and kind of just web dev in general. Um, Something I find like that is pretty cool about content management systems is like their built-in ability to handle a lot of different content types. They're able to easily kind of work with text, video, more interactive media types. Like they'll automatically have things like picture slideshows, the responsive design, the menus, which makes things a lot easier to make a quality website with without that like previous like web dev experience. They also have things that allow for like multiple languages on websites, as well as in some cases you're able to integrate e-commerce as well, which can be very complicated to code on your own or even code like with a framework or library within web dev. And then kind of moving on to web development that is a little bit more technical. We're going to talk about frameworks. So frameworks allow for like faster development. You don't have to build out everything manually by yourself, but you do need to have a pretty solid knowledge of coding to work with frameworks most of the time. And the cool thing about it being open source, like for frameworks, is that there's a lot of community support and continuous improvement. That's like one of the best things about open source, in my opinion, is that if you're working with a framework and you're trying to build out something like very specific and it's too complicated for like what you think it should be, you're able to kind of reduce that burden on other people who might be interested in a similar um, feature on their website by contributing that to the open source framework. And also, you'll have that like the continuous community support throughout that. This kind of like frameworks like really allow for enhanced security and best practices in developing websites because you have these pre-built components and modules. You're able to focus more on how you're handling your data, the data security, as well as the usability of your website, and just like slight modifications to the style and like the design of the overall website. You're able to have a product to ship a lot faster, which is cool, as well as like not needing to work with all the granular details, and it handles a lot more use cases and specific problems in web development, like without you having to think about it, like responsive design, more like usability. They'll have in these frameworks, oftentimes the pre-made components you're working with are already kind of like specifically designed to be user friendly for people with color blindness, and like making it like a good like amount of contrast on these websites, so where you don't have to think about those like stylizing decisions as much. Two examples of frameworks are Ruby on Rails and Django. Ruby on Rails isn't as popular anymore. It gained popularity a little bit earlier, so it's not, I guess, like as presently used as Django. But it's pretty like rapid development in technology, and Django is a very high level Python framework. It's pretty robust in like what it can do, and also for people who have previous experience with Python, aren't like too experienced with web development in general, are able to use this a lot easier than learning JavaScript or TypeScript kind of from scratch and needing to be able to build a website this way. You're able to build a website a lot easier with Django. All right. And then we have finally libraries, which is another aspect of open source web development. We have, I'm going to talk about a few different ones. jQuery is talking more is more focused on kind of simplifying those vanilla JavaScript, HTML, CSS website, and kind of like handles like animation, like event handling. So when you're clicking on buttons and navigating through a website, it's handling that. Angular and React are libraries that are pretty commonly used to build websites kind of completely, at least like the almost the entire front end, and then sometimes handling things in the back end as well. I personally use both at smaller organizations, I think for personal projects as well as at like larger companies. They're like using these. They're built on TypeScript and JavaScript. Um, Angular is a little bit more old and a little bit more outdated, but does still provide great tools for building dynamic and like single page applications so that you're able to have kind of a main page and like load things kind of like off of that versus having a large body of different pages on your website. React is similar to Angular and used a little bit more at more modern and innovative companies, but kind of streamlines that interactivity and like the UI aspect of web development and can be pretty easily integrated into existing web dev projects because of that component based structure as well as it being based in TypeScript. What framework does the MLH website use? I do not know because I did not design the website. Oh, it looks like someone does. Ruby on Rails and Bootstrap, according to, I think, Web App Analyzer. That's something I did not know. Good to know. Awesome. I'm going to step away for 1 second to get some water. I encourage y'all to do the same as well. Be back in about 1 minute. Like, yeah. All right, I'm back. I tend to lose my voice if I talk too much about water. So we're going to continue talking a little bit more about open source web dev and focusing in a little bit more on kind of the history of Bootstrap, as well as how it's directly applicable to web development today. Um, so here you can see Bootstrap is a pretty widely used open source front end framework for web dev, and it's made of pre-designed components. And it's a responsive grid system, which essentially means that it can be viewed very well on both an iPhone as well as a desktop. Here are some examples that I took from a website where they have like a bunch of different companies and websites where they have well-designed Bootstrap implementation. So essentially, the first version of Bootstrap was developed by Twitter internally, but then they made it open source, and it's now maintained by the open source community. So, kind of like the origin of Bootstrap, as I said, it was originally created by Mark Otto and Jacob Thornton at Twitter in 2010. And when it was internal to Twitter, it was called Twitter Blueprint, but then it was open sourced in 2011 and made into the what we now know as Bootstrap. It's been through like many versions. Many open source projects have a lot of versions as they go through iterations to make improvements and add additional features and components. Most recently, version 4 has introduced kind of a mobile first approach, an improved grid system. A large number of people who are accessing the internet are doing so from their phone. So it's very important to um, look at kind of like mobile first development and make sure that your websites are able to be used well on mobile as well as desktop, arguably more important on mobile with so many people using mobile to access websites. A little bit more about the key features of Bootstrap is the grid system. This responsive grid system allows for flexible layout. In your designs, you're able to expand certain elements to fill an entire desktop or laptop page, but it is able to kind of shrink or contrast when it's moved onto a tablet or an iPhone or something of the like. I'll show you this later when we go into a little bit more of our live coding demo. But in this grid system, the columns adjust to different screen sizes, kind of like I talked about. But this allows for a more consistent user experience so that you're able to effectively navigate and interact with the website if you're on your phone, your laptop, a tablet, or a desktop computer. And then kind of following that, in Bootstrap, there's a lot of pre-designed UI components, which allows for a more consistent user experience. They do have a pretty wide diversity of these UI elements, including a lot of like navigation bars, buttons, forms. There's image boxes. There's also like different button sets. You're able to choose a button set for a specific like website that matches your company's or organization's marketing. And then kind of following that, these UI components save a lot of time and allow you to maintain design consistency, which really contributes and adds to a greater like web development experience. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about responsiveness in Bootstrap. Bootstrap really implements and focuses on a mobile first approach, prioritizing mobile device compatibility. And the designs are scaled up for larger screens, ensuring responsiveness and also ensuring accessibility because user accessibility is really important on websites, both to be ADA compliant, but also to make sure that a wide variety of people are able to use your application on the web. I recently attended a talk on accessibility in web development, and they give the statistic that about 1 in 5 people accessing the internet have some sort of additional accessibility needs. So making sure that these needs are kind of at the forefront of your development is important because otherwise you could be losing potentially 20% of your audience. Kind of similarly with responsiveness, Bootstrap emphasizes media queries and breakpoints. And these are used to adapt layouts to specific screen sizes. You may have noticed if you're browsing the mobile version of like something like Gmail versus the desktop version of Gmail, you have a very specific experience, and they often like slightly differ. If you've ever looked specifically at the URL for Gmail and things like Facebook, the mobile like web version of it has a different URL because they have different breakpoints and specific features for both the mobile and desktop to kind of make sure that that experience is intuitive and user-friendly on both. And a little bit more on like the specific customized breakpoints. You can kind of alter these based on the project and how big and like how many images you have on your website. For example, the MLH website has like a lot of images. So that's something where oftentimes if you have overlaid images or a lot of images kind of side by side on desktop, you'll have a breakpoint where at a certain like width of pixels, um, those images will start to be vertical after a certain point versus being like horizontal on the desktop. And a little bit more about Bootstrap security and the standards kind of surrounding that. With any open source project, there is kind of a overall standard that makes sure that the technology is kind of like up to par, and anyone who's utilizing that technology, downloading it is kind of protected. Because one of the big aspects of open source is transparency and making sure that your data is secure and you have data privacy. So Bootstrap adheres to pretty high coding standards and best practices, which allow for clean, maintainable code. And also for beginners, when they're getting involved with web development, they're able to like easily implement the different components. And developers, because these standards are well documented, are able to kind of easily follow and implement these into their own projects as they start to build on this open source web dev. And kind of as I mentioned earlier, regular updates to any open source technology, but specifically web dev, is specifically important because as those vulnerabilities are patched and new contributions are made to this open source project, more people searching for vulnerabilities who have malintent are going to find them. And if you're not regularly keeping your open source project up to the most recent version with those vulnerabilities patched, it may leave you more susceptible to attacks on your website. So now we're going to go into coding a little bit. If you can open up a Replit page, I will walk you through kind of how to build this sample website. All right. So as you can see here, here is the Replit page, and you're able to make a new Replit where I'll walk you through how to create this Bootstrap. So first, once you've logged in, you're going to click on Create HTML CSS Page, and you'll have this kind of general title. I'll change it to something like Open Source Web Dev. Okay, does anyone have any questions about Replit? Are y'all able to access the Replit website? I want to make sure you're able to follow along with the coding. Okay, I'll give y'all a second to work on that. All right, are y'all able to access the Replit page? And we can get started. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to have like this one page shared I'll open up the page kind of in full screen later, but as you can see here, we're able to expand it so it's like more the size of a desktop as well as mobile. The first thing I'm going to do is delete this script right here, just because I don't want the Replit badge on my website. And I'm going to refresh it. And as you can see, it disappeared. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is in the head, I'm going to add this link to the Bootstrap CSS. This just essentially connects it to the CSS like styling of Bootstrap, and it will allow us to access that when we're adding in different elements. And then secondly, I'm going to pull up the Bootstrap JavaScript and jQuery as well. And as you can see, when I refresh it, the font of Hello World changed because I have implemented the Bootstrap styling. So it's now closer to the Bootstrap styling, even though it's just like a basic kind of like Hello World statement. If I change this to an H1, which is just a header one, you will see Hello World, and it changes in bolds and adds into like an actual header. And as you can see here, Replit also has, sometimes it's just disappeared, but it'll have some autofill options. Earlier it had like an H2 that said Hello World, so it'll kind of assist you in coding, which is nice. All right, and based on kind of like what I was showing you originally for the website, the first thing we're going to build out is a navigation bar. It'll say my website, as well as having a home, about, and connect page or contact page. And these are pretty typical aspects of a website. So here what we'll do is we're going to be implementing a navigation bar. So I'm going to comment this out for a second. And then we are going to move right below body to have nav. And we're going to add a few classes to this. And what these classes are essentially doing is connecting to the Bootstrap library, and it's pulling out specific styling. And as you can see here, it has some recommendations based on projects I've coded previously when I was building out this sample web page earlier today to prepare for this presentation. We have this. I'm going to hit tab, and I'll kind of walk you through what these different classes mean. So this is just essentially the default kind of generic Bootstrap navbar. This one is going to expand when large, which means that when it is like a desktop or a laptop, the navbar expands to where you're able to see it completely, but will kind of compress as it gets to a smaller screen like what we have now when we're coding. And this navbar light and the background light essentially makes it into light mode. Bootstrap also has support for dark mode as well. We're just going to kind of stick with light mode today. All right, now that we have the kind of like the first aspect of the navbar built out, we're going to start building in those links for aspects of this navigation bar. So the first one is to link to things, and we're going to have this first aspect of the navbar. So this has a navbar brand, which is linking back to the Bootstrap component, and it's going to link just say navbar, which is not what we want. We want it to have our title. So in this instance, I'm going to put Major League Hacking Open Source Global Hack Week. And then I'm going to refresh. And as you can see, if I expand, it has a title. It's probably not the best title for something to compress when you're on your phone. As you can see, it's kind of just staying the same. So I think I will compress it to just say MLH Global Hack Week open source, and then refresh the page. And as you can see, that's a little bit better for something that's like the size of a phone. And then after we have that title, what I want to have is like a few buttons that are going to have our about page, as well as contact and a home button. So you're able to access different parts of the page. So the first thing I'm going to copy into here is some syntax that connects back to Bootstrap. So this is a button class that has the toggler so that when you're able to, when you're moving to a mobile device, you're able to have kind of like the 3 lines, if you've ever been on a website where you click 3 lines and the nav bar drops down. That's essentially what this is doing. And the type is button. It's a specific type of button that's in the Bootstrap library. This is a pretty simple one. And when the data is toggled, so when you're able to open and close it, it will just collapse and then expand as it's clicked. The target will essentially just show all the information that it's going to expand. And the rest of this is just whether or not it has expanded, kind of showing those default parameters for the application. Okay, and now what I'm going to include inside the button is a span, and we're going to have the class link back to the navbar toggler icon. And this span will essentially just open up this icon that's already in the Bootstrap library. There's a lot of different icons in the Bootstrap library. And this is just like a pretty standard one. You can't click on it right now because I haven't finished building it out, but as you can see, it shows up and you don't have to find that specific icon and kind of like adjust the size of it to your application because Bootstrap has already made that component for you, which is pretty nice. And then after that, we want to add a few different items here. So first thing we're going to do is have an unordered list. And we're going to make this with the class of navbar nav. So this is just essentially making this list follow the navbar specifications of Bootstrap. I'm making, connecting it to that design. All right. Okay, and this first thing I'm going to kind of copy in and then just walk through this specific item within the application. So this specific item is the first button within the navigation bar. So it's going to be a list item within our unordered list of the nav bar, and it has the class of nav item. So it's a specific item within the nav bar, and we're making it active. So what that means is essentially this will be the first highlighted item in the navigation bar, and it's the home button. So it will automatically go back to the home page. As I refresh, you can see that this is kind of the first one, and it's just like essentially living there because I haven't like completely built it out. But it is bolded and the other ones will not be bolded. I'm going to bring in kind of the next 2 list items for this navigation bar and walk through those as well. So this is another line item, and it just has a class of navbar item versus navbar item active. And the difference between this and the first one is that it will not be bolded. It's not like the first selected one, just because it's not going to be used as frequently as the home page. When you're accessing a web page, of course, you're going to the main or home page the most often, and the other pages are kind of just also there. They both have a class of navigation link, so which gives it consistent styling under the Bootstrap component library. And all of the links, as you can see here, don't have, like, they're not linked to anything just because this isn't a fully fleshed out website. But in the future, when you're trying to link it to a specific item, you would do something like about .html in this case, or .html. Looks like I accidentally deleted this, but it would essentially take you to the website at this like / link. Bootstrap is not one of the open source web dev libraries where you're able to access like all the different content from a single web page. All right, I'm going to refresh this page. And you'll be able to see kind of the updated parts. It isn't doing anything right now just because I haven't added the responsiveness for it to toggle back and forth. We'll get into that a little bit later. But as you can see, all those items are there and they're kind of just staying there regardless of how wide I expand the screen until about this point. And then like that goes away because the toggle screen has gone away at this specific breakpoint, which I think is right about here. You can see. But the clicking responsive of these going in and out is not quite there yet. So now we're going to kind of, after that, build out the next aspect of the website, which has more information on the like the website itself. It has more information on the website. So we're going to make this into a div class. In web development, a lot of times you'll see people using divs for everything versus what they're supposed to be used for. But as you can see here, I use the navigation bar specifically for navigation. I have a body tag to make sure that that content is properly separated and that you're able to like properly kind of distinguish between different things. I'm also going to delete my hello world h1 element just because I don't think it's fully necessary to have right there. And then within this, I'm going to give it the class, this div, the class of Jumbotron. And this essentially will give it certain stylistics. So it's going to give it a pretty standard kind of design for a website where you have the name of the company as well as some more information, and it's displayed pretty widely across the front of the page. And then within this, I'm going to have a specific H1, not like our hello world H1, but an H1 with a specific styling class called display for. And this is just going to essentially add more information. I'm going to refresh the page. And as you can see, it's added this Jumbotron kind of below it. It's pretty simple, and I think I'm going to maybe expand it into more verbiage versus the title because just we have the room to on this display aspect. Refresh the page and it updates. And then underneath that, I just want to have kind of like a simple like tagline underneath it. So I'm going to add another element that's just a P. And here we have what is auto-populating based on me working through this example in the past. It's going to have P class lead, which essentially is like the tagline, but it's a smaller text. We are building a simple web page using Bootstrap, an open source web development technology. Then I'm going to refresh the page. And as you can see, it's already styled kind of as a tagline, giving you more information about what this website is. And then after that, I'm going to add in a simple HR, which essentially has a line to separate the different content. And I'm going to give this a specific class to follow the style guidelines of Bootstrap. So as you can see, there's that line. It's pretty subtle. We didn't have to kind of find the right width, the right color of that, and it matches our style guidelines as well. Then after that HR element, I want to add a little bit more information. So underneath that, I'm going to have information on how to fill out the form. Essentially, I'm going to have another P, but this time, instead of having the class of lead, I'm going to just have it be like a normal P element. Click the button below, and I'm going to make a button on the next line. So this is a learn more button. This one has stylistic information from the Bootstrap library. So it has a class of button, which is essentially just designing it as a button. It's making it within the primary groupings of buttons because they have a lot of different stylistic components you can access. It's making it a pretty big button. You're able to change the size as well. And as you can see, it pops up here. Doesn't actually lead to anything, but the button exists there. Someone is asking, what's the difference between class and class name? So class is typically used to add class within a CSS aspect, whereas class name, where I've used it in the past, is typically in larger open source web development frameworks. I've used that a lot in React. You'll have class name as how you assign that specific class, whereas in more vanilla CSS, you'll just have class to assign that. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. So now I'm going to continue building out this Bootstrap page. So for this particular page, it's going to be pretty similar to the MLH site, where you can see different hackathon events. You have a specific card on that website where you're able to access a picture of the hackathon, as well as a link to the hackathon, more information, etc. So first off, we're going to start off by making another div. And this div will be for all of our different cards. And the div class for this one is going to be the same as last time, just a container, because we want to contain everything in here. After that, what we're going to do is create this into a row, because on the original site, if you saw on the PowerPoint, it was side by side originally, but as it compresses, it goes into it goes from horizontal to vertical, essentially. So as you can see here, we have the div class of row. I'm going to close that div so we don't get confused later. And after we have that, I'm going to make our final div, or our second to last div, to make the specific card. So here we have div class col small 4. So this has more information on that specific card. It's small. It's following a specific type of it's following a specific style guideline, as well as being a smaller one versus the more larger cards you can have through the Bootstrap. For the people asking for the code, yes, I will share a link to that in the chat. This is view only, so we don't have any kind of issues with overwriting the code, you're able to access it and kind of like watch along specifically on the code if you want to do that here. All right, so this is our last div before we get to the actual content of these different cards. But within this one, we're going to have just the div class of card. Close this one. Let's see. We have 1 div, 2 div, 3 div, 4 div. So we need one more closing div class. I know this can get a little bit confusing, but you'll see kind of what's going on in a second after we get this kind of like nested structure going. So after that, we're going to make this adjustment to make it a specific size because we don't want it to be too large. So this essentially is using pretty basic CSS directly in a line. Normally you would add this in a different CSS file with it just being one page. Doesn't get too confusing with the width of 18 rem. So what this means is essentially 18 times the size of the basic P element font. So typically it's around like a 12 to 16, so it's 18 times that. And it makes it more responsive because as the text size shrinks later, these elements will as well kind of scale with that. Someone is asking, how do you remember all these Bootstrap styling guidelines? The answer is most of the time you don't. A lot of the times you're referencing things. I did build out this entire website beforehand just because I knew I wouldn't be able to remember every single class live on camera. But a lot of times you can go to the Bootstrap website. There's an excellent website called W3 Schools as well, where you're able to access a little bit more information as well, kind of about like web dev in general. But if you're looking to read more about Bootstrap in particular, you're able to access that here. And kind of like how you get in the groove of like working with the syntax is you just like need to kind of like break things and fix them. That's how I got better at web development. Someone said, I love W3 Schools. I love W3 Schools as well. Okay, so we're going to finish building out this card. So now that we have kind of the last div where this card is going to live, we're going to add the first image, which I'm going to copy in so I don't mess up the specific image source. So as you can see here, this is an image element and it has a link to on this one. It's just using a placeholder image. You'll see what that looks like in a second. And it has the class with card image top. So it's having the image be at the top of the card based on Bootstrap styling. And it has like a specific guideline for how it's going to look within the card. And it knows that it's an image. And the alternate text here is card image, which is not great alternate text for people who are using screen readers. So I'm going to change this to gray square. If I can spell, that reads 150. And then after that, we're going to add kind of like the title and information into this card. So here we have div class card body, and this is going to house both the title as well as the P information. So within that, I'm going to have an H5 with the class of card title. And I'm going to title this card 1. And then beneath that, what I'm going to have is a P just with some like basic card text. As you can see here, then I need to close that P. I'm going to refresh this page, and here we can see our card. As we like squish it against the wall, or we're like essentially making the screen smaller, you can see how things kind of change. But as it expands, you see that there's a little bit of buffer room on the side for this card, and there will be as we add more cards. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to bring in, let's see, I'm going to separate this so it says card 1 code. I'm going to comment this out so I can kind of separate where the structure for all of the cards versus like the individual ones kind of separate. And there should be 1, 2, 3 divs in between each card. And then we're going to have card 2 code. I'm going to comment that out so we have our little separation. And then I'm going to copy this down to make our second card. I'm going to have the second image here just be another placeholder, but we'll change that once we get kind of the structure of this website set up. And I'll change this to say card 2. I will refresh. And as you can see, we have card 1 and card 2. And as you would like, they kind of expand, you can see they go horizontally versus vertically. There needs to be a little bit more stylistic here. I think I maybe forgot to implement one of the Bootstrap classes because typically there is that space in between them. So I'm wondering what I did wrong. Oh, I see what I did wrong. So right here where I have div class card, I needed to have div class whole SM4. And then I will refresh the page. And these you see are a little bit more well separated. Personally, I would prefer like a little bit more buffer room, and I'll add that in a bit. But as you can see, they're working a little bit more responsively than they were previously when they were going horizontally. So here we have, okay. 2 divs are closed, and then 1, 2, 3 divs are closed here. And then I'm going to start with the card 3 code, just so we can kind of have that grid set up. And this does look like a lot more code, but it's just the code we kind of previously walked through. As you can see here, we have card 1, card 2, and card 2 again. So we'll change that to card 3. I will refresh that. And here we have it. For this particular one, what I think I'm going to have in each of the cards are different images of open source web technologies. So the first thing I'm going to do is copy the image address of the Bootstrap logo on the Bootstrap link I just sent y'all. And then here, up in the code for card 1, I'm going to alter the image source to have that specific address. So it's routing directly to this specific address, which is card 1. And the next one I think I'm going to do is Django. I'm going currently to the Django website where I'm going to right click on the Django logo and I'm going to click copy link address before I open up to here one more time. And I go into card 2 where I'm going to replace the image source right here. And then make sure I close that quote. As you can see here, it did not work. Oh, because it just copied the Django project. So I see what's happening. The Django logo on the Django website is a link itself. So it was copying the link versus the Django logo. So I'm going to go click on it one more time and inspect the page where I'm able to access the specific information. Okay. Here we have, it's an A. All right. All right, they're both links. So I'm just going to copy a random image off of the Django website. And sometimes that happens. If I had a little bit more time and wasn't live coding, I would find that image, just like spend the extra time. But right now I think it makes more sense to just kind of add it in later. All right. Oh, it looks like the original Bootstrap link did not properly get added in. So I'll do that. Here we have the heart that I took from the Django website. And now I'm going to take the link for the Bootstrap website as well. I'm going to refresh the page. And as you can see, we have the Bootstrap logo, the heart from the Django website. And I think the next thing I'm going to do is go to the React website and find an image of that. I'm going to copy the image address once more, and then I'm going to go down to this specific card 3 and alter the image source. That's a very long image address, but it works. I'm going to maybe try and find a shorter image address so it doesn't take up my entire screen. All right. Okay, I see what's happening. All right, give me one more second. I am determined to find a shorter React address. Let's see if this works. Control Z, Control V, that's much better. And then I will refresh and the React logo is still there. Awesome. So now as you can kind of see, it's kind of coming together. There's still a little bit of spacing issues, but those images are coming together quite nice. I'm going to change the third title to be React, and then the second to be Django, supposedly, because we don't have the actual Django logo. And then here we'll have Bootstrap. And then here, those were all updated. So now that we have a little bit more content there, I'm going to kind of finish building out this original page we have. So at the bottom, there's some information about contacting people. And I want to add that in case anyone has questions about open source web development. This isn't a website I'm going to actually implement, but it gives you kind of an idea of different elements on an actual web page. All right, so now that we've finished up this specific div where we have all of these items, we're going to make a new div class with the name container also, and this is just containing information about the contact information. Underneath that, I'm going to close this div again so we don't get confused. I'm going to make another H1 so we can kind of title this. Within that, I'm going to have contact us as a title. And then beneath that, I'll have some more information on how you can actually contact us. So this is all going to be within a form. And I'm going to add this kind of like all at once from the original project I built out. And I will talk a little bit more about it as I work through it. So here, as you can see, within my container class, I have first the contact us and this form, which I've closed here. And within this, I'm grouping together a few different things. It's first, we have the label for this specific item, as well as the actual input. If I refresh the page, I can show you what specifically we're working with. So here it has name, as well as your name, and that's grouped together. And within Bootstrap, you can see that it has input type text, so it's only taking in text. It has form control, so it has those kind of like auto constraints from Bootstrap. And with the placeholder, it has your name because it's just trying to collect your name when you're asking questions. If you have any questions about the form, feel free to drop them in the chat, but I'm just going to kind of continue along with the form. After that, I'm going to make another form group. And this one's going to be just email. And it's very similarly just going to be collecting your email right below this. So as you can see, contact us, name, email, etc. And then finally, after that, that's like enough information for us to have like on the person. So next thing we're going to do is add in another div class with a form group, but this time we're going to have their actual question. This one is going to be label for message. And in here, we're going to have just the input type be just like plain text because it's their message or question. So here we have this. What do you want to know about open source web development? And then we're going to refresh. And here we have the message. But the last thing that this form is kind of missing is a way to actually submit the form. Most forms, when you submit them, will have a button where you can input all of your information that you just submitted, and you can't currently do that with this one. So how we'll do that is just by adding a button that we can add kind of an event handler to later. I don't know if we'll get to it in this particular stream, but that's what you would eventually get to. So here we'll just have a button with the type submit. So we know this button is for submissions versus linking to things, with a class of button with button primary. So it's just like the default kind of button we saw earlier as well. And as we refresh the page, you can see we have this whole kind of contact form built out. And then as we close in on this, you can see the web page as well, the navigation bar expanding. This is the overall kind of meat of the website. What I'm going to kind of get into now is how we make a few adjustments to make this more user-friendly, get that final, like the navigation bar to like click and toggle, as well as a few other things. So the first thing I'm going to try to do to fix the toggle issue is I'm going to scroll all the way to the top and I'm going to delete the style sheet from Replit just because we're not using it. We're only using inline CSS and the styling sheet from Bootstrap. And I'm going to refresh the page again. As you can see, not fixing the issue. Now I'm going to look a little bit more into kind of the top of my HTML. So we have the doc type HTML, we have the HTML opening tag, we have the head element with the meta char set. So that's all kind of important information so that the website is able to access important information about how wide to make it. I want to change the title so it says MLH GHW open. I want that to be all caps. Open source. What this does is if you're ever on the web and you see like at the very top of the screen, it will say Google, YouTube, whenever you're accessing a website. You can't see it now just because I'm sharing just a single tab on my laptop, but you're able to, that'll change when you see it in the tab. When I expand this later, I can show you what that looks like a little bit more. Okay. So now I'm going to dive more into this. We have our body with the navigation bar. And immediately after that, we have a class. We have a link button. Let's see if I properly closed all my classes. Okay, navigation is closed. The link is closed. Is the button closed? The button is closed. But I think I have spotted the issue. What I did is I closed the button after all of my unordered list. So all of these are the items that are supposed to be kind of housed in this element and kind of deleted whenever, not deleted, but like they're supposed to contrast as the website gets smaller. So here, that's kind of, I think, the first step in fixing the issue. And then after that, I think I forgot. Yes, that's what I forgot. Is this specific div class. We already have this. So this is the div class that essentially allows the bar to collapse when you're navigating it. So I'm going to make sure that is properly closed. So I will close that right before the navigation bar, refresh the page. And as you can see, that's all now housed in this. And as you click on it, it toggles back and forth. I don't know of any phones that have this few pixels, so maybe expand it a little bit. And as you can see, this is kind of what it would look like on a phone. The only thing I would really change is adding a little bit more space between these three, but I still think it's a pretty usable and user-friendly website. As you can see here, you're able to toggle between them. And as you expand the page, that button eventually disappears. But here, when it's like about like an iPad's width, it'll still have that. The one thing I don't see here, or we added links here, but when you go to the About page, it isn't actually accessing any About page. So I'm going to refresh that, and we're going to alter those links. Okay. So down here, where we have the contact us, I'm going to add an ID of contact. And then on our cards, I'm going to add an ID of cards. Here at the Jumbotron, I'm going to add an ID of home. What this is essentially doing, not only can you add stylistic elements with the IDs, but you can also add links, which is how I'm going to link to these different items, even though they're on the same page. So I'm going to link to href. Will be, I guess this will be about and then I will just have this be empty because that's to the home. And then contact, I'm going to have the pound sign or number sign with contact. And that will add links. We don't have a link specifically to the cards yet, but we can add that in later as we see how this is implemented. I'm going to refresh the page. And then I want to hit contact. And as you can see, it brought us to the very bottom, focusing on the contact us page. This is kind of how you add internal links with your Bootstrap website. So you're able to have like a page that is a little bit more expansive and easily navigate. It's more easy to navigate for people. So we have this. You click on About, it focuses in on this. And I think the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more item to our navigation bar. So in addition to About, I'm going to add a list item, also with the class nav item, because I don't want it to be the center of attention. And then when I close the item, add a link with the class nav link. And then I'm going to link this to cards. Double check that's what I made the ID. Close that. And make sure the list item is closed as well, which I think I've done. And then I'm going to refresh this page. As you can see here, the cards have been added and it links directly to the cards. Yes. I think the final thing I'm going to do to edit this website before I take specific questions on Bootstrap and kind of everything I just did, and it was kind of a lot of information at once, is I'm going to replace just kind of the filler text we have here with a description from each of their Wikipedia pages, which is an awesome open source application. So the first sentence from the React page, I'm just going to copy in right here. As you can see, React, also known as React.js or React.js or React.js, It's a free and open source front-end JavaScript library. And here are the reference links, which I'm going to take out for our description, for building user interfaces based on components. And as you refresh the page, you can see that text has been updated. So I'm going to do the same thing for Bootstrap and Django. All right, so here's where I previously deleted the lorem ipsum text, refreshing the page, and you can see some information about Bootstrap. And then finally, I'm going to go in and replace Django. And here, I'm going to delete the lorem ipsum text. And then here, it still has the phonetic spelling of Django. Going to delete that. Going to delete the reference number, so it just has the basic information on Django. Going to refresh the page. And here we have it. Here's our website. I'm going to open it up in a full screen, so I'm going to stop sharing momentarily, and then I'll open up this website in full screen. And then I'm going to stop screen sharing and share this page. Perfect. Can you all see the website now? So this is the open source website. As you can see, the full capacity. Here's us focusing in on the about cards, and it changes up here in the header. I don't know if you can see the actual URL. You can't on me sharing my screen, but this is what the URL will look like. It'll have the entire website name, and then it will have at the end $sign about. So linking to that specific ID on the page. And you can do that with about, cards. It'll change the link to cards. If we scroll back up again to contact, it'll do that. If we had a sticky navigation bar, which essentially means the navigation bar stays at the top no matter if you're scrolling or not, we would be able to click home at the very bottom and it would take us back up to home. It doesn't really do much now just because we're already at the top of the page, but I think you get the point. Awesome. All right, so that's it for the coding aspect of today. So now I'm going to go back to my slides and kind of answer any questions you'll have. I have the bit.ly link to my slides if you want to access that, and I shared the link to the Replit in chat. Do we have any questions about what I just coded, open source development in general, Bootstrap? Did I use Django? I did not use Django. I used Bootstrap for this application. I have used Django in the past. It was a little bit more complicated as far as screen sharing with y'all. So I just figured I would do Bootstrap for this workshop. But in the future, I could maybe do a stream on Django. It looks like a good amount of viewers learned a lot, so that's good to hear. Always glad to teach people more about web development. It's one of my favorite aspects of technology. Django is a little complex. I've spent many hours debugging that for class and for projects as well. Awesome. I'm going to go back through and see if there's any more questions I missed earlier when I was walking through the coding. All right. If there's no more questions, I'll be ending the stream. But thank you to everyone who came out today. It was great getting to talk with y'all and learn some more about open source web development. Um, be sure to check out some more of the open source streams through Global Hack Week. But thank you to everyone.